Hello, my name is Mesut Durukal. I'm a software quality assurance engineer. In daily basis, we are trying to improve the confidence on our product that we are developing, which means we are trying to ensure the quality in the products that we are developing or delivering to our customers, clients, or end users. Quality assurance has lots of different components. We are designing test cases, we are executing them, and we are collecting some insights from these test executions, which means we are analyzing the test results and we are trying to fix the vulnerabilities or the weaknesses after we find during these executions. But nowadays, we can say that test automation is an important part of this whole chain, of this whole software testing lifecycle. Because nowadays, we are not having big releases or seasonal releases, but instead, we are having continuous delivery and continuous integration. So, which means whenever we have a new update or we have a new commit to our brands or our repositories, we have to ensure that these updates do not break any working functionality. So this means we have to do the continuous testing activities. So only with manual testing efforts, it is not easy to perform these testing activities because we have already some implemented test cases. We can execute them in an automated manner and it will already facilitate and improve the efficiency in our testing activities. But of course, test automation has also some difficulties and challenges. So in this session, we will a little bit talk about the reusability of the test cases, because if we have some duplicated test code, then we will have some trouble and we will have some maintenance issues trying to cope with these kind of challenges. In our project, we use Cypress, but whatever you are using or which framework you are using, these solutions or the proposal can be applicable to any test automation framework because we will talk about some generic solutions and the proposals. So this will be the brief agenda for this talk. First of all, we will talk about the code duplication and the importance of the reusability. And then I will do a quick reminder of key Cypress features, what kind of features we can utilize, and by utilizing these key features, what kind of improvements we can do, we will discuss and eventually we will have a quick demo. So let's get started. First of all, why are we talking about code duplication or the reusability? Why is it very important? Because as we just discussed, we have lots of different challenges in quality assurance activities. Nowadays, there's a great rivalry in the software market or the software industry. Everyone is going to trying to go to production very fast and as early as possible. And it is also important to collect some feedback, early feedback from the customers or the end users. So, which means while doing these agile practices, we have very limited testing window. After the end of maybe 2 weeks or 3 weeks in a sprint time, we are supposed to have some minimum viable products or the shippable products. And it is not easy to execute all the test cases we have in this limited time because it is not executing the test cases only related to the new functionalities but also the existing behaviors as well. Because even if we implement only some new features, they can break the existing functionality or the existing behaviors. So we are supposed to execute the regression sets. So in this limited time with limited resources, it is not easy to perform all these testing activities. And not only this, but also Agile is very open for changes. So if the customers have some new change requests or they want to see some new functionalities in the products that they are using, then we accept them. We are open for these changes, or even we are open to change or update the existing behaviors or the existing specifications. So, which means sometimes we have to update our test cases. So, it is not working like we implement once and it lives there as is forever. So, sometimes we have to update, sometimes we have to maintain our test cases. Since we have already started discussing about maintainability or the maintenance, there is another aspect of the quality in the software test automation frameworks, which is the reliability. It is connected and related to the robustness and the stability as well. So let me explain what they are by going over some examples and illustrating. First of all, if the test case is not failing, it is just passing and not reporting any failure, when there is a bug or vulnerability in the feature, it means we have a silent horror case because normally there is a potential risks in product or in the feature, but our test case is not capable of finding this or not revealing this. So maybe we will just let it go production and it will be reported by the customers or in the later stages. So we will have an escape bug. On the other hand, if test case is failing when the feature is working properly or working as expected, then it means it is not a real bug because normally the feature is aligned with the expected behaviors. The actual result is matching with the expected result or the expected behavior, but somehow our test case is failing. So it is not a real bug, but it is a false alarm. So it means by after all these kind of reliability issues, we will have some extra maintenance issues or the analysis efforts, because we have to understand if the failures are the real bugs or some false alarms. So both to update our test cases due to some changes in the specifications or the requirements, or due to the failures stemming from the test code but not from the production code, we have to maintain our test cases. And if we have some duplication, of course it will be much more difficult to fix them, because we will go several places where this kind of common or duplicated code is used, and we have to update or fix the problems or the issues. For example, if we have some login steps in lots of different test scenarios, for example, if we are going or navigating to the login page and then providing some credentials or authentication parameters, and then proceeding with the next steps, and if this step is duplicated in lots of different scenarios, when they change the login algorithm, rather than using just the username or the password, if they're asking for maybe one login algorithms or maybe two-factor authentication algorithms, then we have to change this algorithm. But if we are duplicating this login algorithm in our test automation framework in lots of different places, then we have to fix and update or change the code in lots of different classes. Or otherwise, if we have some false alarms stemming from a weakness in the test code, stemming from a test smell, then we will have to fix this in lots of different places. Let me give an example from my actual project. As our company, we help people get jobs, which means by using our products, the employers can post some jobs and the job seekers can search jobs according to their needs or skills and apply to them. For this purpose, we have lots of different web applications. They are all serving to different needs or different purposes. For example, some of them are for looking for contract based or temporary jobs, or some of them are for finding permanent jobs, and some of them are serving to nurses or any other majors, and some of them are supporting different languages and can be operated in lots of different regions in the world. But eventually, there are some test cases and scenarios which can be executed on all of these. For example, performing a query. By passing the keyword or the area, the location where you are looking for this job, you can perform this query. So this test case can be executed on all these applications, because all of them have the same requirement supporting these queries, performing these queries, and this should be executed on all these applications. So what I can do is, rather than implementing test scenarios for all these web applications to cover this requirement, I can implement only one test case and somehow make it executable on all of them by changing the configuration. And not only the application under test, of course, I can cover lots of different other configurations. For example, even the browser on which I'm executing the test case, I can change. For example, all the users are not using the same browser. Some of them are using Safari in the macOS or iOS operating systems, and some of them are using Edge in Microsoft or Firefox or any other browsers. And not only the web application on the desktop version, but also on the mobile versions some users are using on their mobile devices. And for our test environments, we have different stages. For example, first of all, we deploy our code in the development environment, and then we proceed with QA environment to ensure the quality, and eventually we deploy the production environment. All right, so let's see how we can implement re-executable test cases, which means they can run on different browsers across different web applications or platforms in different versions, either the mobile version or the desktop version, and in different stages, either the development environment or QA or prod stage. Running on different browsers generally do not cause any duplication because the test code remains same, but you have to choose only the browser on which you want to execute your test cases or the test steps. But even the version that we are testing, either the mobile or the desktop version, can cause some duplication. When I first joined my project, I realized some test cases were re-implemented only for executing the mobile version or testing the mobile version, because the system that we were testing was not responsive, And if you want to switch to the mobile version, you have to set some user agent headers into your requests. And of course, you have to set the screen size, you had to set the viewports, and even some locators were different because even if the buttons or the other elements, the text box that you are interacting with are same, they were differently identified in different versions. So you have to pass different locators or selectors to let the system know which element you want to interact with. So there are different, of course, difficulties and challenges to make reusability and implement reusable test cases, but still we can do it. For example, if we want to test different web applications, then we can dynamically generate the URLs that we try to navigate to, or we can generate or build a smart locator strategy to be able to cover lots of different locators, sometimes differently identified in different applications or versions, or even the mobile testing. We can do some conditional statements and we can execute our test cases in lots of different configurations. So we will have a demo and we will see how only one single test case can run on lots of different configurations. But first of all, let's a little bit remember the key features or the functionalities of Cypress that we will use. And this is a test case eventually we will have. It's a very simple scenario which can be executed on lots of different configurations. We can change the stage, the version, the browser, or even the applications on which we want to run. So the scenario is basically navigating to the URL of the application and then locating a keyword and then start typing some queries or keywords. And then the expectation is just after start typing our keyword, we want to see some auto completion suggestions. So as in any other search platforms or messaging or emailing applications, we know that after we start typing, we already see some auto completion suggestions. So this is the behavior or the specification, the requirement that we have in our product as well. So just after start typing our queries into the text field that we want to test, we already want to see some auto completion suggestions. They should already show up. So this is what code is doing. It is very simple. It is only two lines of code, ignoring the logging steps. So first of all, we are doing our query and typing our keyword, and then we are doing our assertion. So to be able to implement this re-executable test case, let's start by going over some features. So first of all, the configuration. In Cypress, the configuration is done with a config file. So in this file, we can define our variables or the parameters. For example, the folder in which we want to keep or manage our test cases, we can address, or even the fixtures folder, the plugins file, we can define an address. Additionally, we can set our retry numbers, which means whenever a test case fails, do we want to retry? Because we already discussed that some of the failures are not stemming from the product code, but from the test code itself, or maybe some environmental configurations or the parameters. So if there is an intermittent issue, if there is a temporary situation, maybe after we retry, maybe the result will change. So it will start passing. So to be able to understand if this is a real bug or a false alarm, just a flakiness, we can just set some number of retries, either two or a more number of retries we can try, and eventually we can understand if the test case is still failing or passing. And after some test case failed, the screenshots are taken. In this way, we can understand what was the situation of the page when the test case failed. And we can address the folder in which these screenshots should be saved. And even we can enable or disable video capturing as well. So in this way, we can watch the test executions and we can understand step by step the progress in the test executions. And eventually, last but not least, we can introduce some custom variables. So with some keys, we can pass some values and later we can read these custom environmental variables. In Cypress, we can execute our test cases in two different modes. First one is the open mode, and the second one is the run mode. So open mode starts the Cypress runner. It does not automatically start the test execution, but first of all, we will see the runner itself, and on the runner, we will select the test case which we want to execute, and then the test execution starts. But when we select the Cypress run mode, then the test executions will automatically start and we will see the test progress already. But we can pass lots of different parameters with these kind of execution modes, either the open or the run mode. We can pass lots of different parameters. For example, we can select the config file, because we already see that we can introduce some environmental variables and we can overwrite these values. Even if some keys are defined with some certain values, we can pass another value to overwrite these keys with env parameter. But if there are too many variables that we are overwriting, rather than overwriting, maybe we can create just another config file, and in our execution we can address this second config file. So there's a chance to pass the config file parameter as well. And similarly, of course, we can select the browser and we can select the spec file as well, because normally when we run, the whole set will execute. But maybe we don't want to see all the executions, but rather we are interested in only one certain spec file. Then we can show the relevant spec file, or even a set of spec files, not only one, but using wildcards, we can show some different numbers of spec files. And we have hooks which execute before or after each individual test case, or before and after the test suites. And in this way, if we have some repeated steps which are done before test cases, for example, if we are preparing some variables or initializing some variables or classes, then we can collect these kind of repeated steps into the hooks. And one more thing which can make life easier for us, or even further improve the implementation, is defining global hooks. So if we implement these hooks inside the index.js file, then even if we don't implement the hooks inside the spec file, then still they will be executed when we start our test execution. But if we have both the global hook and the hook that we implement inside the test spec, first global hook will start, and then the hook that we implemented inside the test spec will execute. So in this way, we can reduce the duplication and we can collect all the repeated steps like initializing and the tear up code that we run after the test executions. We don't have to implement in all the test classes again and again, but instead we can collect them in the global hook, and they will automatically execute after the test is done. And of course, we can create some separate classes as well. So we generally call them as helper classes. If we have some repeated algorithms, which is done inside different test classes, then we can collect these algorithms into some functions, which can be defined in separate classes, separate helper classes. So in this way, again, as we discussed in the previous slides, when we have to update our test code due to some fixes, some smells, some failures stemming from the test code, or due to some behavior change. For example, if we have an algorithm to perform the login steps, then if we have to change it, we don't have to update in all the test spec files one by one. But when we define them in the helper class, then we only go to the helper class itself and we update the function itself. So it will be reflected from all the test spec files, which is calling this function. So whenever these functions or the variables defined inside the helper classes are exported, they can be imported from the other spec files. And this is another great way to reduce the duplication and improve the reusability. This is the base frame line of the Cypress key features. But how about the page interactions? Because the main thing that we are doing in the UI automation is interacting with the page elements. For example, we are passing some keywords or the text values, or maybe we are clicking the buttons, we are selecting some radio buttons, or we are navigating through the menu items and we are selecting some of them. How can we do that? First of all, we should navigate to the URL addresses, and then we should locate the element. Because normally how it works for us, for human beings, we open the page and we see the elements. We see lots of different buttons or text fields, some string values, some labels, and we understand which one we want to interact with. But to let the system or to let the code to understand which element we want to interact with, we have to pass the locator, we have to pass the selector. This is the element that I want to interact with. And there are lots of different ways to locate the element, we will see. But after somehow we locate the element, we can interact with them. So we can either click or if it's a text field, we can clear, or we can type some new values, or we can do lots of different interactions. And then eventually what we will do is, of course, doing some assertions, because we have some expected results. And after doing this kind of interactions, we will have the actual results. So we will try to see if these are matching with the expected results, or there are some variations between the actual results and the expected results. If that is the case, of course, we can raise some bugs to be fixed in our development activities. So how can we locate the elements? We can pass the parent of the element that we want to locate. So in this way, the system can understand checking the parent of the elements, and under which we want to select the element, then it can return the relevant one that we want to locate. But it is optional, so we can proceed with the other ones. The other ones are the tag name, which specifies what kind of element this is. Like, is it a button or a label form or any other type of element? And the class name, again, these two are optional. Every element has class names, so we can pass. But since these are optional, we can proceed with some attributes. So we can pass some attributes with some key values with the certain values that we want to see. For example, if we want to locate an element with a certain name, then we can pass the name attribute, key, and the name value that we want to see on the element. So in this way, the system can return us the relevant element. But sometimes multiple elements, more than one element is found meeting with the selection criteria. So in this case, a list will be returned, but we can still narrow down this selection uh, among the returned list items. So among this, we can select the one which is visible, because maybe some others are not visible. They are still existing on the page, but they are not visible. So we can select the one which is visible. So we want to go with that one to interact. But one suggestion here is at this point is selecting unique IDs. Because as we discussed, if we are testing multiple applications, there are lots of different locators defined on the elements. So what we can do is, if we introduce some unique IDs, we can use the same one on different applications. For example, if we have a search button which exists on different web applications, normally they can have lots of different class names or class paths, because all the pages have some different layouts. But if we are using these unique IDs, we can just pass the same one on different applications. And not only this, and also it will help us to improve our reliability and the stability. Because even if the developers change the layout of the page, maybe the paths or the class names will be updated or changed, but this unique ID will be there. So this is something that we have done in our project. We have made an agreement with the development teams, and they will introduce data test IDs, which is a unique ID added to these elements. And even if the layout of the page is changed, then it will be still not breaking the test case, and the test case was not broken. So this is why we are saying testing is not uh, something that we can achieve individually, but it should be a team effort. So it will be a holistic approach. This is the importance of doing some collaborations with the other teams. So in this way, we can improve the efficiency and the maintainability of our test code. So now it's time for demo. I removed myself from the screen to better use the whole screen, and I will exit from the presentation and go to my ID, and let's get our hands a little bit dirty and start implementation. So now I will switch to my ID, and yes, this is my ID, which is IntelliJ. So I don't want to lose time to install Cypress, so I already have it. So everyone can install if you don't have, just running the npm install Cypress. So it will install the Cypress, and the folder will be just under the root folder where you run or execute the npm install command. And we will have by default some folders like the fixtures folder or the integration folder by default, where the test cases are stored. And we have some support folder under which we have the comments and the index. And yeah, this is the basic template of Cypress. So I want to start from scratch. So I will create a folder for myself. And let's name it as demo folder. Cool. And let's create our first test spec file. Let's name it as my test. I will implement this in a JavaScript language, but either JavaScript or TypeScript can be used. I will go with JS. Okay, I already have my test file here. Let me a little bit zoom in to make it visible for everyone, and we can get started. So let me find the template for the test code. It will be something like this. So we have the test suite here, which is specified by describe, and we have the test case here. So this is my suite, and this is my test. So what I can do is I can add some test steps inside this test. So I already have a test here. It will, if I execute this, I can execute already, but if I execute, it will not do anything because it is just empty. There is nothing inside, but still, it is a test, and I can already execute it. So let's try actually. So what I can do is I can run the Cypress run command here, and as we discussed in the slides, I can pass the spec file because I don't want to run all the test cases. For now, I don't have any, but in time I will have a lot of them. But for now, I want to execute only one, which will be the mytest.js file. By the way, before starting, let's check the configuration file. It will be here, cypress.json. So normally, I already have a demo folder here, but normally it will be something like this by default, integration folder. Sorry, integration. Okay. And I have some custom environmental variables here I can remove. But let's try to execute our test case. When I execute, it says that no spec file is found because it is checking all the test cases or the test files under this folder. But my folder is different, so I have to rename it. It will be under demo folder. Okay, let's try it again. Yeah, now it is found and it is passed. Congratulations. So we have the first pass test. Of course, it is not doing anything. So let's a little bit add some test steps here. And what I want to do is, let me show this slide again. It will be a scenario like this. So first, I want to go to my landing page and I want to type a query in the text field. And then finally, I want to click the search button. So let's go. And the web applications that I will use, one of them is called Workopolis, something like this. So this is just a job seeking web application. I can just type some keywords here, like I want to search for engineer jobs in which city? In Austin, still, let's say. And I can find the jobs, relevant jobs. Okay, so this is the list of all the searched or found jobs. And I will use another one, which is a very simple website, which is called charisma.in. And again, we can see there is a similar functionality. I can type a keyword. Let's type something like I want to be a manager in Pune City. All right, I have all the jobs. So what I will do is I will use this keyword, text field, and this button. So as I described previously, of course, I have to know the locators. For example, this one is here. I can see it is specified with ID, query input, or with a name Q, and with some other attributes. And how about the search button, find jobs button here? So it is just a button with type, submit, and I have a data test ID here, which is a unique ID. And let's check the other website. This one, I remember this ID, query input was also there, but I think name was different. Let's check it again. So the name here is, for this one, was Q, but for the other one, it will be AK. So if I use this locator with the name attribute and with AK or Q value, it will execute on one of these sites, but it will not execute on the other one because it will not find such a attribute with the specified value. But what I can do is I can use ID key. So in this way, the query input value will work for both web applications because it is same. And for the button, search button, I can use data test ID. I think it was the same in the other one. Yes, find jobs, search, submit. All right, so let's get started. So what I will do is, first of all, I will add the code to go to landing page, which will be something like this. I will start with Charisma site. And then I want to get the text field, and I already know the locator that I want to use, which was something with ID. And then I will type a keyword. Let's search for engineer jobs. All right. I will add my locator later on here. And then I want to assert if my query really worked. So the same locator, again, get after I typed. And this time I want to ensure that it has the value that I already passed here. All right. And after typing this, what would we do? We would click the button. Okay. So what was our locators? I'm checking in the other screen on the browser with inspect. So it will be something like this. And for the button, it will be something with data test ID. All right. So we have a test with some steps inside. Now let's one more time try to execute this. What will happen? Yes, again it passed. But we didn't see what happened, right? Because run mode by default executes the test with headless mode, which means we are not running what is happening on the browser. But we can enable a headed mode. So let's try to do that. Let's select our browser as well. So what we can do is we can select the browser with headed mode. Now we already see the browser here. So we see that it is navigating to charisma.in, and we already see that it typed engineer, and most probably it clicked button, but we couldn't see, it was too fast. But we can see it is working. And what we can do already, we have some duplications. It is too early, but we have it. So what we can do is we can remove these kind of duplications, and we can remove the magical variables here. So let's define them as a variable. So this is my query, and let's use it where it was duplicated, here and here. So if I somehow change it or update it, both will be reflected, and maybe here as well. Okay, so this is already done, but what I can do is, again, maybe this test case is completed now, but this locator can be used in some other test cases, other scenarios. For example, for auto completion, as we discussed in the slides. Like whenever I type something, I want to see the auto completion suggestions. So for this, I will use the same text field. So I have to define the same locators in that test class as well, and it will be a duplication. So what I can do is I can somehow move this into a helper class. So let's create a helper class for us. Under demo folder, let's create a new file, and I will collect my locators into this class. So let's name it as my locators. That's JS. All right. So I have to define my class here. Let me a little bit zoom in. Let's name it as my locators again. And eventually I will export all the variables and the functions defined in this class. My locators. Okay. And here inside I can define my variables or functions. So let me copy this from here. Text field. I don't need to define the variable again. So, and let's copy this as well. And this will be my button. Of course, naming should be implemented in a better way. It should be understandable, but for now, just quickly I'm typing it. And it will be something like this. Yes. All right. And now what I can do is I can just import, because the values or the functions exported here can be imported from my test spec file. So let's import this. And now I can use that class inside the spec file. So first of all, let's initialize that. It is this one. Okay, so from this class, I can just call the text field. Awesome. And similarly here, and here the button. So in this way, I don't have to define the locators again and again in all the test spec files. I don't need this anymore. Awesome. Let's try it again if it's still working or not. Yes, it passed again. And what else we can do? Let's check the code here. So now what I can see is I have this variable as well. So why don't we move this as well to a global variable? So how could we do global variables? We can use the hooks. So first of all, let's go to support and index.js. So this is the file where we can define our global hooks. So let me add before here, which will execute before all the test suites. Let's zoom in. Okay, so what I can do here is I can move my variable here, which was the URL of the landing page. So let's define it here. To make it a global variable, I'm using global this. Let's call it, name it as main page. It would be this one. All right. And now I can just use main page. I don't have to import any other class because it is already a global variable. And since we collected all the locators inside this helper class, I have to initialize the class inside all the test spec files. It is again a kind of duplication. So I can still get rid of this. So what I can do is even this class I can define as a global variable. So what I will do is I will move here to my global before hook. It will be like this. And rather than using this, I will make it a global variable. All right. And when I add this, of course, the import will be automatically added. And I have my locators as well here. So I don't need to initialize again. Since I'm not initializing, I don't need to import as well. So it is again super simple and understandable code. So what I'm doing here is I'm navigating to my main page and then I'm locating the text field and I'm typing my query. In this case, it will be engineer string. And then after I type, I assert that it already have the query. And finally, I'm clicking the button. So after our change, let's see if it is still working. Yes, awesome. So we can, of course, see by injecting some errors intentionally. Like, for example, if I want to see any other query, like not the my query which is engineer, but the query itself as a string value. Let's see what happens. Okay, it typed engineer, and now it is expecting to see my query, but it found engineer. So I should say this in the logs as well. So expected and actual did not meet. Expected was engineer. Sorry, expected was my query, but the actual was engineer. So the test failed. All right, everything is so far so good. So let's see what we can do next. So we can execute the same test case on the other website. So this will be a real reusability scenario. To make this test case re-executable on several websites, what should we do? How does it work? Because normally it is navigating to this website, but sometimes we will want to navigate to some other sites. So somehow we need a conditional statement here. For example, if something happens, then use this URL as the main page. Okay, and in some other conditions, use the other website, which was workopolis.com. So this is the point where we will use the Cypress configuration. We have already discussed we can use some configuration, we can set some configuration variables and then read them. So let's introduce a new environmental variable in our config file. For example, let's use my app under test and set it to a default value, which will be, let's use the first website, which was Charisma. All right. Okay. So if the configuration is set to Cypress, if this configuration is set to Charisma, then navigate to this. Otherwise, if it is set to Workopolis, navigate to workopolis.com. So let's see what happens now. It is navigating to Charisma. And when I change it, Workopolis, what will happen? It is navigating to Workopolis now and entering the keyword into the text field. But again, we don't have to change the config file each time. So let's keep it in default configuration and let's override by a parameter. So which was like, we can execute the same command with an additional parameter, which is the environmental variable. And my key was my app under test. I want to set it to Workopolis. All right. it is still navigating to workopolis.com, even if the key is set to another value in the configuration file. Since we are overwriting in our command, it is still navigating to the application that I want to test. And let's see how we can execute it in a mobile version as well. So at this point, what we can do is utilizing the loops and the test configs. So let's see how we can do that. For example, I want to loop this test case to iterate over both the mobile version and the desktop version. So I want to pass a list here with desktop and mobile. And I want to iterate over this list. Let's name each iteration as execution platform, let's say. And what I want to do here is I want to run my test case for each this value. But what it will do for now is only it will execute 2 times because I have 2 items in the list, but the same test case will execute. So why did I add this? For now it doesn't have any effect. But I will use the test configs here because we see there is a config variable inside the test, which is not the global config that we are talking or discussing from the beginning. It was the global configuration managed in the config file. But this time we are talking about the test config, the configuration of this individual test case. So we can add some custom variables here. So let's add a platform, or let's name it as version, desktop or mobile version. And let's assign the execution platform coming from the iteration variable to this version. So now I have this test config, which will be once desktop, and in the second execution it will be mobile. So how can I use this config? When I again go to my global hooks, this was the block which was running before each test suite. Now I want to make some changes before each test case, not the suite. Because if I want to execute over mobile, then maybe I want to change the viewport. So let's add a before each block as well. All right, so before each, what I want to do is I want to check the test config, but which config of which test? The current test that I'm running. So this is a super cool feature of Cypress. I can use this code. This means the current test suite, and inside the current suite, I can pull the current test, and from the current test, I can check the test configs. So I added just a custom test config, so it is an unverified test config. So what was my custom config? It was version, as I guess. And now I will check. I will check and I will have a conditional statement here. If this equals to mobile, all right, then change my viewport, which will be setting the relevant device window size. So if the application that I'm testing is responsive, then I will be already testing the mobile version. And okay, so we can change the viewport. There are already some predefined mobile devices, so I can use just iPhone 5. Okay, so let's see what happens now. Uh, this time let's use the Cypress open mode because I want to see the Cypress runner. If I'm using the open mode, I don't need the spec file anymore because I will see all the spec files that I'm using or I already implemented, and I will select the relevant one that I want to execute. And I don't need the browser as well because the browser options are on the runner again. Okay, I can pass the application under test variable. Cypress runner is here. So I can see all the files under my folder, which was the demo folder. So I can see my test spec file here. And I can select the browser that I want to run. Somehow there is a warning here for Firefox. So let's go with Chrome. And anything else I want to set? I think we are ready. So let's see what happens. When I execute, the browser starts. And okay, now workability is under test. And in the second execution, I already see that the viewport is set to iPhone 5 window sizes. So I can already see I am able to execute the test case on different versions, either mobile or desktop version. And I can again go to the relevant steps and see what is happening. Here I can see it is getting the relevant element here and it is typing my query, and then yes, after typing all the string, again it is getting and asserting, and it is finding the next element, which was the find jobs button, and it is doing the click, and it was the last step. And in the second execution, we can see that before each, it already realized that in the second execution, the test config was set to mobile. So it changed the viewport, and we can already see that the window size was set to iPhone 5. So when we proceed back, navigate back, we can see the viewport change here. But during the execution, we already saw it was set to iPhone 5 screen sizes. Coming back to presentation, let's wrap up what we have done in our demo to increase the reusability and remove duplication in our implementation. So we went over a very simple scenario, which was mainly 2 or 3 steps with some assertions, and we implemented our test case, and then we start removing the duplications by using the functions or the classes introduced in as helper classes, and we imported those helper classes into our test spec files, and we called the functions or the variables that we defined inside those helper classes. And in this case, we don't have to introduce again and again in the test spec files. Once we already defined them, we can call from lots of different places, and we can introduce some global variables to remove the duplication. And then we introduced environmental variables in our configuration. So in this way, we can generate our URLs or some other variables in dynamical manners and in a smart way. By some conditional statements, we can call the relevant locator, or we can go to the relevant web page with relevant URL, or according to some other configuration of variables, we can dynamically generate our test inputs or the test parameters. And then we saw how we can use the test configs. So in this way, we can set the configurations for the individual test cases, even the individual test executions inside the test execution loops. So in each of them, we can set to a certain variable, and then by checking the value of the test config, we can take the relevant action items. So this is an example usage of test configs that I'm generally doing in my implementation. I'm setting the test ID to match with the test description. So in this way, you can just go and read the test scenario and try to match with the test implementation. Or I can set the platform on which some test cases are executed on mobile. For example, auto location features. Those are by using the navigation systems in the mobile devices. It can be executed only on mobile but not on desktop. So sometimes I'm setting to both mobile and desktop, but sometimes only mobile, or sometimes even only on desktop. And if there are any known issues already, for example, if the test case is already failing due to a known issue, then I can mark the test case with some known issues, and it can be already excluded from the test suite. So if the automation framework detects that there is a test config marking the known issue, then the current test can be skipped and it can be excluded from the test suite. And for mobile testing, we saw how we can change the viewports, and since the device window sizes are set to our browser emulations, the mobile version of the applications that we are testing are already covered by these executions. I didn't go over the intercepts, but if the tests are not running, or if the applications that we are testing are not responsive, and if only changing the viewport is not enough for mobile testing, we can set the user agent headers to be able to emulate the relevant mobile version. And we saw how we can loop test cases to execute with lots of different configurations. So by utilizing all these key features, we can change the browser by passing the relevant parameters, or we can change the version on which we are testing, or even the applications that we are testing, we can change. Of course, by building a good locator strategy, because if we are implementing or introducing the unique common locators to all websites by using the same locator, even if we are navigating to a different web application, we can still find the element that we are trying to locate on the web pages. So this was again a good sign of the collaboration and the teamwork, because only by the QA teams or the testers, it is not possible to complete all these testing activities in a very limited time and with very limited resources. So again and again, we are saying testing is not something, or quality assurance is not something which can be achieved by individual efforts, but it should be a holistic approach. So I wish everyone a happy testing environment in which everyone is aligned and oriented around the quality mindset.